now that we've left off with the Bronze Age in Greece, I want to pick up in our discussion of classical civilizations with the heroic age in Greece. And so you can see the period of time we're going to be concerned with as we're discussing the heroic age is from 1000 to 800 BC. And you can look down here on the map and you can see again Greece and where Greece is situated and the area that we're talking about right here. Now during the Bronze Age, we know that the Mycenaeans were in power at the end of the Bronze Age. And while the Mycenaeans controlled mainland Greece, Greece was pretty unified. When the Mycenaeans fell and Greece reemerged in 1000 BC, it didn't emerge as a unified whole. It emerged as a group of what we call polises. And a polis just translates as a city-state. Now the largest city-states in heroic age Greece were Athens, and you can find that on the map, Thebes, Sparta. Corinth was also a pretty large city-state at the time. Now, these polises were centers for political, social, religious, and artistic developments. And the people in these city-states had a very strong sense of identity. They associated themselves with the city-state they lived in. So in other words, people who lived in Athens considered themselves Athenians. The same was true with the Thebes and the Spartans. They didn't really consider themselves Greeks. Now, this was good and bad. It was good in the fact that they were the center for lots of cultural development, and they competed with one another, and so lots of wonderful artifacts and literature come out from this period. But the downfall of this was that they just couldn't get along. And so when they were faced with outside invasion, that they had pretty significant issues. And so their competition with one another, their inability to get along, really led ultimately to the downfall of Greece. Also, in the heroic age, like these other, like the earlier cultures we have looked at, they had a polytheistic religion. So they worshipped many gods. And we'll look at that and those gods in a minute. The art of the period was geometric, and there's some significant developments that happen in geometric art that I want to point out to you. Also, the greatest Greek literature, many people say, came out of the heroic age. But let's talk about their religion first and foremost. Like I said, they were polytheistic. And you can see in the chart over here the different gods that they had and what those gods represented. Now their beliefs and worships and practices were often contradictory. For example, they worshipped Apollo, who you can see represents the god of intellect and reason, but at the same time they worshiped Dionysus, who was the god of emotions. So this in some ways shows their quest for balancing those two very human impulses, intellect and emotion. And this attempt to balance those impulses will be something that we see over and over in classical Greece. Another way that many people think that their religion was contradictory is that Zeus, the head god, the father of gods and men, sat as a moral judge, but he himself had very questionable morals, and he had numerous affairs. Interestingly, the Greeks didn't really believe in a supreme good or a supreme evil. This was not part of their religion. And they thought that religion was there to explain life, not necessarily to inspire it. Interestingly, they believed that literature, not religion, was the way to discover answers to human questions. It was very, very human-centered. The gods acted more like umpires, watching and commenting on the actions of people. So they were polytheistic, and these are the ways that their religion played out in their culture. Now, very quickly, let's talk about proto-geometric art. You saw most of this art on painted vases. There would be very simple, bold designs. They strove for clarity. They strove for order. Now, around 900, you get geometric art. And one of the most important developments of geometric art was the meander, and also the attempt to depict human and animal forms. They strove to make sure that these artifacts were very mathematically designed, and this impetus toward mathematical precision will become very important later. Now, typically, the vases and other artifacts that proto-geometric art and geometric art appeared on were typically used as containers for offerings, grave markers, different types of religious purposes. Now, this is an example of a piece of proto-geometric art, and you can see the very simple, bold designs and the patterns here. I want to talk for just a brief minute about this particular piece, and this is actually as we've moved into the more geometric period, and I want you to see some of the developments that happened. I hope that you can see this maze-like pattern. If I can show it to you. You see it in several lines here. This is the meander, okay? And this is very, very characteristic of geometric art. I hope you'll notice, too, the precision, the balance, how everything on this particular vase looks planned, looks ordered. And that's one of the hallmarks of Greek art and Greek sculpture. They were constantly striving for balance and for order and proportion. And so I hope that you see that in this piece of art. Now, if you notice right across the front of this particular artifact, you'll see what looks like, to me anyway, little stick figures that are in some sort of funeral procession. You can see these standing up, and then these people look like they're carrying or supporting this recumbent figure. Now, they were very concerned with representing humans. They wanted to do it. But this, as you can see, this very early attempt, they're very stylized and not realistic. But it was this desire to reproduce humans realistically in art that becomes the basis for Western art. So as we move through this classical Greek period, I want you to pay specific attention to how their depictions of humans change, how it moves from this stylized representation to something very realistic. Now, I said many people believe that the best Greek literature comes from this heroic age and comes specifically from Homer. Homer is credited with writing the Iliad and the Odyssey, but there is a great controversy surrounding this authorship and a great deal of mystery surrounding the poet. Homer is considered the first figure in the Western literary tradition, but the Homeric question refers to the controversy surrounding whether or not he was the one person who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Some people believe that yes, he did it all himself. Others believe there was a group of poets that just took the name of Homer. But regardless, scholars tend to assume that the organization and the connections between the parts of the poems suggest that at least one poet had to have served as editor, one who selected and fused the parts together. So that's the question. Was it many writers and one editor, or was it truly Homer the man that wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey? Now, both the Iliad and the Odyssey are epics, epic poems, and these poems were embraced by the Greeks as national works. And school children learned both of these by heart in school. And it served as the basis for education, for their culture, and for morality in life. These poems originated in oral tradition, and poets would tell these stories over and over and over. And like I said, they are epics, and so there's some particular conventions that all epics share. There's a hero that's a national figure, and in both the Iliad and the Odyssey, you have that. The subject matter is heroic deeds, great wonderful things that these heroes do. The verse is very dignified, that often with similes that compare the hero to the gods. You have supernatural mixing with the natural, the gods coming down and intervening in the lives of the characters or the people. And it occurs on a world stage, or in this case, a Greek stage. And the poet usually maintains objectivity. That is, he's just relating information to you. And these poems usually begin in the middle of things, in the middle of the action. So the Iliad, for example, takes place during the Trojan War. It's concerned with the politics of war, who should rule, who should fight, and why. It's also concerned with Achilles. He's the main character, and he's characterized as a swift runner. We really see the anger of Achilles in the Iliad, and he's often referred to as godlike. And Achilles is he's a warrior, he's a fighter. And so you have this story that centers on the battle between Troy and the Greeks, and Achilles as the hero, and how the story comes about, and how Achilles' anger leads to problems in the story. Like I said, Achilles is the epic hero, and the epic hero has particular characteristics. There's usually unusual circumstances surrounding his birth, so there's always that sense of, could he be a god? And some event leads to a journey or a quest. And of course, there's trials during the quest. And the hero always has supernatural help and or hindrance from the gods, and is typically rewarded spiritually at death.